Now, the tan area on this map is what we consider a normal temperate climate that has enough of a winter chill to kill some bugs and enough of a summer growth season in order to make things agriculturally possible, and enough rain that doesn't all have to be irrigated. Now, it looks like China has a lot of that, but most of it is in this northern section. Now, northern China is kind of unique from the American point of view in that there's no internal barriers. Everyone can pretty much go anywhere, but the river system is erratic. You certainly can't transport things on it. And what that has meant is for the last 3,000 years, it's been impossible for the Chinese to consolidate this region in any sort of meaningful way, because you can always have some government somewhere that kind of is off on the corner. And by the time you get over there to forcibly assimilate it into your system, you have another problem over here. So Chinese history is a history of civil war and genocide until very, very recently, until the 1950s. And so northern China has a very different mindset than the rest of China. This is where the militarists come from, the politicos, the folks that are like, China unity, China unity, China unity. That's all they care about. Economics are a distant second. Now, in the center, you've got something very different. The Yangtze is one of the world's great rivers. It's navigable for about 1,800 miles, which is on par with the Mississippi, although it doesn't have any of the tributaries. And the reason that matters is moving things from A to B on water is about 1/12 the cost of moving them on land. So whereas you get all these militarists and strategists in the north who are always worried about military cohesion, in the center you get the industrialists and the financiers and the traders and the manufacturers. This is the China that we think of when we think of an industrial powerhouse. And it's real, but it's not all of China. It's just one river basin. And then finally, you've got a section in the south that's in the tropics. That's the green. Now, the tropics are, great for a vacation, but they're not the best place to live, because when you don't have a winter kill, you get fungus, you get bugs, agriculture is difficult, and the people get infected with all kinds of tropical diseases all the time. It's bad for health. Southern China is also on the other side of a very rugged topographical region of several hundred miles thick from the rest of China. So this area has always been the last part of China to be incorporated into any sort of overall Chinese nation. So militarists in the north, industrialists in the center, secessionists in the south. There's a reason why Hong Kong is where it is. Now, the way you get everybody in China to be on the same page, there's two things you do. Number one, you beat the crap out of anyone who steps out of line. The Chinese are very good at that. And second, you bribe everyone to be on the same side. You throw bottomless supplies of capital at any sort of economic project, not if it makes sense, not if it'll make a product that somebody wants, not if it'll build a bridge, but if it'll employ people. Because if everybody has a job, no one's rebelling against the central government. And so if any time the Chinese actually suffer recession, the whole system's likely to fall apart. So they have basically adopted an Enron-style finance structure to keep everybody ungainfully employed. Remember those finance numbers from earlier, that way up? That's what this looks like on the ground. But it's not the same everywhere. What we've done here is we've broken down how China grows by the three different categories of growth. The first is consumption-led. That's Mexico. That's the United States. That's the purple in this map. Just two provinces, one of which is the capital. So it's like you wouldn't expect Washington, D.C. to be export-driven, would you? It just consumes. That's Beijing. Second, export-driven. We think of China like this, but it's really not. It's just the blue. It's not that exports are unimportant elsewhere, but they're certainly not the main driver. The third category is loan-driven. That Enron strategy, that's the yellow. That's a lot bigger. In the orange, loans aren't just the number one source of growth. They are bigger than exports and consumption combined. And in the red, those loans are more than exports and consumption combined and doubled. Whoops. That black circle, that's where all their citrus comes from. So you have an economic system you're competing with. that is part of a secessionist part of the country and is among the least economically viable sectors that they've got. Agriculture writ large in China is one of the most subsidized systems that they have. And if anything happens to the capital structure, the whole thing implodes. All right, let's talk Egypt. This is a proto-orchard on the edge of the Nile Valley. There's a lot of things that look like this in Egypt. I wasn't able to find an actual citrus one. These, are, of course, are date palms. You can see that it's dry. I don't know if you knew this, but most of Egypt is desert. And deserts are dry, and citrus needs water. So the question is, how do you get the water to the orchards? Pretty basic, right? Here's a graphic that I stole from my former employer that I produced when I was there about 10 years ago. Anything is green has water. Pretty simple, right? All that water comes from one source, the Nile. There is no rain in Egypt, ever. Well, not in the last 3,000 years anyway. But check out this zone here. You see how it's a different color? This is the post-industrial new territories that the Egyptians have settled. Back in biblical times and really right up till 1980, everything in Egypt was pretty much done by hand. So if gravity and manpower did not allow you to irrigate a zone, it did not change from brown to green. It stayed brown. But post 1980, they built out some water pumping infrastructure, and using everything from electricity to diesel, they were able to lift the water higher up out of the floodplain and into these new territories. Here's a zoom in on the western side of the Nile. The coastline there is Alexandria, for those of you who are familiar with the area. You can see the very stark difference in color between the main Nile Delta and these new settled lands. All Egyptian citrus production, all of it, is on these new reclaimed lands. All the reclaimed lands in Egypt is above the floodplain. All of it requires irrigation. All of that irrigation requires electricity or diesel. If there is any issue in Egypt at any time with social cohesion, with government central control, with electricity supply, or with petroleum supply, and the entire system collapses. How long can citrus trees last if they can't get irrigation? You guys know the answer better than I. Egypt is one of the most politically unstable places in the world. It is one of the countries most dependent on the current globalized order, because when they started going into specialty crops, when they started doing citrus, when they started doing cotton, they stopped growing wheat. If they, for whatever reason, cannot maintain output, they lose the currency gains, the currency sales that they need in order to buy wheat on the international market. So everything that you might be concerned about from Egypt will go away in the next 5 years. They will not be able to keep this going. The situation is not quite as bad for Spain, and to understand that, you need to kind of look at the demographic picture. So what I've done here is I've built a graphic that compares youth to retirees. So the lighter your blue, the more young people you have. The more you get into yellow, orange, and red, the more older folks you have. And if you're red, you have something like 1.5 times as many retirees as you have young people. Now, here in the United States, we have a whole lot of blue. Demographically speaking, the United States is a young country. In fact, we only have 4 states where we actually have more older folks than young folks, and Maine, West Virginia, Florida. These tend to be places where the young people leave relatively quickly, or the old people are coming in. So it's about what you would expect. Here's the United States, and here's Europe. Remember, blue and green are good, orange and red is bad.